Testing, 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 testing. One, two, three. Testing, testing. Okay.
Now, easy.
Hello, testing, testing. Testing, testing.
Yeah, we can wait a few more minutes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Ah, ah. Mm. Mhm, mhm. Mm.
Don't complain. No. Nobody should complain about the rain. Right. So maybe we'll wait for another 5 minutes or so. Can I have the right? Okay. We are.
I don't want to be bad about it, but it's just a bad habit. Education setting to,
Right. So if no one here objects, then we can start on time.
because the ones who are not here are not objecting. So.
You want to sit here?
Please, yes.
Let me just close the door.
Okay.
We used to teach theater classes, so.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Today is a raining day. Okay, today we will dive into one of the most pressing issues of our digital age: the intersections of artificial intelligence and information security. With the rise of AI, we have unprecedented tools at our disposal to detect, analyze, and counter malign foreign influence in the information environment. But while AI promises to be a powerful asset in safeguarding information integrity, it also presents new challenges of bias, ethical considerations, and even the potential for exploitations by malicious actors. Our focus today is to explore how AI can be leveraged effectively to detect and mitigate disinformation, while addressing the technological, ethical, and social questions that come with it. Today we have Duwen Lee. He's an American technologist and national security expert. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at Edge Theory, an AI company that provides detection, prioritizations, and visualization solution on influence dynamics in the information environment. He's an information security executive specializing in how to leverage data and AI to detect malign information operations and promote reliable and accurate information. He is also a member of the social media task force at Georgetown University. In addition, Lee works with trust in media, military veterans in journalism, and new debates as a senior advisor. Lee has extensively published in leading journals and magazines on how to mitigate and prevent the harms of malign information in content supply chain. Before joining Edge Theory, he worked at leading AI company in Silicon Valley. He also taught at the Naval Postgraduate School for more than 11 years as a faculty member and principal scientist. There, he developed and executed operational and communication technology project with federal R&D agency to support the United States government's effort to combat violent extremist network and disinformation. I pass the floor to him. He would like to have more conversational form of interaction. Yeah.
I'm really humbled and thrilled to be here. I think Penang is a really important place when it comes to Malaysia as a whole. It's a really geopolitically and economically important place when it comes to artificial intelligence. Think about where Malaysia is, think about Penang's importance when it comes to the global AI infrastructure. So I think they're really important considerations to think about and to discuss within the context of artificial intelligence and information integrity. Before we get started, if you can do me a huge favor, please feel free to pause me and ask me any questions. I think the more we converse, I think the more meaningful this venue can be in my mind. I want to talk about perhaps just 4 things this morning. First of all, I want to sort of unpack whether something has really changed or not. I think whenever there is a new form of technology, we have a tendency to hype it up, or essentially think that this is the end of every single time we have a new type of technology, we tend to have this, oscillation. So the internet came out, we all thought that perhaps, journalism would die in a few years, right? Writing would be meaningless, and so on. So I just want to unpack what it means to have artificial intelligence in the current media ecosystem, and what are the risks and opportunities in this space. And I think there are a lot of people who have identified real, but sometimes perhaps a little bit inflated risk about artificial intelligence. I think those are really important concerns as well. But I do think we're not looking at the opportunities that artificial intelligence provides. And these opportunities also need to be very localized, right? So there can be no sort of universal implications of artificial intelligence in my mind. In that context, I want to share some examples where we see this weaponization of artificial intelligence quite a bit. And I think, as you can imagine, this year and next year, over 60 countries will have national elections. And we've seen some indications that malign actors have used artificial intelligence to generate, propagate, misleading, if outright, to influence the outcome of these elections. Number three, I want to be very pragmatic, and that is, I want to sort of share certain tools, certain practices where artificial intelligence can be very useful to you. I think this is a really rapidly changing field. So I think it's kind of important to, I think a lot of my friends and colleagues, they're too busy just criticizing what artificial intelligence is and can do, right? But because this technology is changing so fast, I think it's really important for all of us to be active users and evaluators of different AI models and think about what kind of use cases will be most aligned and most constructive. And lastly, I want to sort of, perhaps have a conversation about then what are the strategies? What are the conversations we should have about artificial intelligence so it will align well with perhaps social stability, economic development? And the reason I keep coming back to this point is that if you think about AI as a type of global infrastructure with multiple supply chains, there is this inherent inequality and asymmetry in that infrastructure. Let me give you a very quick example. I think all of us, understand that large language models require vast volumes of content data to be trained. And a lot of times there is this continuous retraining pipeline, right? Where do those training data sets come from, right? A lot of them are actually copyrighted. The vast majority of them is actually human generated. So a lot of AI companies, mostly American AI companies, use these vast volumes of human generated data to train and develop their AI models. And they sell these AI models to consumers, to enterprise organizations, and they're also getting a lot of investment capital, right? So a lot of people, not just in the United States, but elsewhere, generate all this training data. AI companies have been scraping, ingesting all this data for free. So you can see there is this inherent inequality and asymmetry in this global AI infrastructure, so to speak, right? But also there are AI developers and there are AI users, right? And currently, also the relationship is very skewed in favor of essentially AI developers, right? So if you think about how these dynamics may manifest in the next 5 years, 10 years, or 30 years, I think there are real dangers of protracted inequality and asymmetry. So I'm hoping that, given that Penang is such an important place in this global infrastructure, I'm hoping that, policy makers or perhaps even researchers will start really having these conversations and to ensure that some of these considerations and policy conversations become much more integrated to how we develop artificial intelligence, how we use artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. And the reason it may sound a little bit too grandiose. I think it is possible. However, when I was in high school, people used to tell me that, oh, you don't have to learn how to type on the keyboard. This internet thing, it's going to come and go, right? And they're like, this internet thing, this is just for like games and pornography, right? There's no way it's going to affect global trade, right? There's no way it's going to affect elections, right? And there's no way we're going to use the internet to talk to our friends thousands of miles away, exchange commodities, right? Send, $10 million through the internet. There's no way those things would happen. That was literally just 20 years ago, right? Now the internet, right? Financial transactions, right? Sending and receiving perhaps the most sensitive information for military operations, right? Or perhaps just sharing cute cat pictures, right? While looking at some funny Asian guys dancing and singing on TikTok, checking my bank account, right? This is ubiquitous and omnipresent, right? Frankly, it took how long? Only 2 decades to go from a novelty, right, for a few people to chat online about things, right, to becoming this global infrastructure of everything we do, right? I do think we have to get into this conversation right now, because not doing so means that certain countries, certain segments of society will be left out of this global infrastructure, right? And there will be this incredible asymmetry. And frankly, this artificial intelligence is not even new. The first discussion of this happened when? In the late 1940s by mathematicians, right? They were looking at the human brain and they were thinking about, oh, perhaps we can use this notion of neural network to come up with a machine that can calculate better than us. So this whole notion of artificial intelligence is about 80 years old, right? So there is nothing new about artificial intelligence. What is new is this particular architecture that we call, right, transformers, right? Well, also known as large language models, right? And this architecture is qualitatively different from what preceded the transformer architecture. And I think there's a very unique implications that we want to talk about. So I think that's kind of lofty, right? So let me start with some concrete examples. Wrong direction. It's okay. It's okay. I have my fingers. So let me share some, how things are. AI could accelerate and scale propaganda, right? Well, information operation, disinformation, misinformation, it comes with in a lot of different flavors. But, propaganda is just political storytelling, right? And storytelling is as old as human history. In fact, history begins with storytelling, right? So I'm just trying to understand what has changed. So that guy over there, his name is Mikhail Šimeska. He's the leader of the Slovakian Progressive Liberal Party. And 11 months ago, Slovakia had general elections. 24 hours before the polls opened, there was this interview, audio interview, that was uploaded to Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. It featured Mikhail Šimeska talking to the editor of Denik N, it's a third largest newspaper in Slovakia, and they're talking about how they're going to essentially fill envelopes with cash, send them out to the Roma community, the gypsy community in Slovakia, because they thought they're going to lose the elections. So they're trying to bribe voters to be able to get more votes, right? And within 2 hours, this audio interview was heard by hundreds of thousands of people on Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok, right? When the polls opened, by the time the polls opened, this interview had been heard millions of times, not only in Slovakia, but in the region, right? You can imagine this was AI generated. Michal Šimeska never had come that interview. Fast forward 4 months, Bangladesh had general elections earlier this year, right? And you see this guy? He looks like a news anchor, right? And it says U.S. Embassy Bangladesh, right? So there was this news programming uploaded to Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube again, just 48 hours before the polls open. And this news anchor is talking about how the U.S. government is essentially siding with Israel, right? And then essentially ignoring the sufferings of the Palestinians in Gaza. And thus, I think, he was saying that, the U.S. should learn from Sheikh Hasina, then Prime Minister of Bangladesh, right? And there was another video with the same platforms. And this time, opposition leader, it's a Muslim majority country, and he is supposed to be a Muslim, but he is struggling to voice his support for the Palestinians in Gaza, right? In Bangladesh, saying something like that is literally heresy. Of course, his party lost miserably in the elections. Guess what? It was completely synthetic. It was a deepfake video, right? On and on and on. Even in our own country, there was this robocall that allegedly Biden was making to a lot of Republican voters not to participate in a primary. Guess what? Biden never made that robocall, right? It was synthetic. All a. Oh, now it's working. Well, somebody is doing this for me. So it turns out that forensic research, this is really interesting. It turns out that the fake audio interviews were generated using an AI model sold by 11 Labs. Essentially, it's a voice cloning AI company in California, like most tech companies. That's where I live, that's where I work. That literally you can pay $10 a month, and if I get 11-second long audio clip of your voice, right? I can upload that clip to 11 Labs, and I can start building lectures. It may look like me, but it'll be your voice, right? Takes only $10 a month, right? The fake videos that I was talking about earlier, it turns out that after some forensic analysis, they were built by a company. Certain actors use this company's tools to make those fake videos. It's called HeyGen. You can look it up. It's perhaps one of the most popular deepfake generators out there. Again, do you have a Facebook account? Perhaps I'll connect with you, right? And then I can start downloading your pictures, right? You may have some videos. I can download your videos, right? I can upload them to HeyGen, and I can start making deepfake videos featuring you. And I can type exactly what I want the deepfake persona to say, right? And it'll start saying those things, and it'll be you, right? You can say things like, I'm going to resign from Penang Institute because I don't like the staff, right? But the boss is awful, right? You can make all kinds of accusations, right? And people will buy that, right? By the way, it costs only $24 a month to use HeyGen. This is nothing new. Fake news, has been around, right? fiction has been around with humanity, right? But it's the scale, speed, and affordability of building such content that is truly different with transformer models, right? So let me see if it works. This is worth watching.
And if you live in the UK, you might have heard me on BBC and on TV. If you're a music producer, you may have downloaded my vocals/acapellas on freevocals.com. And if you're a parent in Sweden, you may have heard me as the Fisher Price learning toy voice. So for the payouts with 11 Labs, it's definitely a significant passive income. We started the voice library with a few voices in March-ish, and we're way over 100 million characters altogether, which is just blowing my mind. Charlotte is the powerful and seductive voice I created for 11 Labs. And she's anything but shy. I'm the voice of me, and she's a cute little Swedish creature.
So you don't have to be a voice actor to build multiple variants of your voice. And then you don't have to even say those words. You can just type those words, and 11 Labs will create those audio clips for you.
You have so much control as an artist.
Just-
I also got passionate about being the first Swedish female on there. So I got Sarah Hart Generation, and Vandal Install. Så in alla intryck.
Oh, even if you don't speak multiple foreign languages, with 11 Labs, I can pick Spanish, I can pick German, right? And then it'll use my voice to say things in those designated languages. Now, this is a demo of HeyGen, the deepfake generator. That's not a real person. That is fully AI generated.
You can create your own avatar for free, so give it a shot. Okay,
So, just to give you a little bit more context about this, I've seen these indications of AI-generated content in pretty much every election. You know that there's a big election taking place in the United States in 2 months, like literally in 2 months, right? And this is becoming a real risk to ensure that our election is securely and safely executed. So I can tell you that a lot of government programs, but also researchers are really scrambling to be able to come up with AI-powered detection tools, right? Tools that we can use to analyze this kind of content. But this is not an easy proposition, because the thing is that even if you detect something, right, by the time you declare that fake, synthetic, it had been viewed by millions of eyeballs, right? The harm had been done. You can pull back the content, but the effect that content had can never be put back in the bottle, right? And these things do not stay online, right? So I'll give you another example. I'm pretty sure a lot of you are familiar with search engine optimization. It's called SEO, right? So whenever you are curious about something, let's just say there's a big, crisis or a big accident, when you hear about these things, what's the first thing you do? What's the first thing you do? You pull up your phone, right? And then you try to search for it, right? And then you're trying to scan through the search results, right? Who decides what pops up on the top of that first page? You? No. Who does that? The search engines, right? Driven by algorithms, right? Can you change that? Can you manipulate search engine optimization? Absolutely. How? Why do they index certain things up and index down certain things? Yes, ad money, right? It's all about ad revenue, right? And sometimes some of these search engines can be a little bit transparent, and they'll say this little thing, right? Sponsored. And sometimes I have to scroll down the entire page to get to the real results, not the sponsored results, right? So, I'll give you a very good example how this is actually done. So I'm pretty sure a lot of you and a lot of us are tracking what has been happening in Gaza, right? Now in the West Bank as well. So it turns out that Israel has been making these allegations that UN, refugee agency was harboring terrorists, right? And they were accusing, UNRWA, right? UN, refugee relief agency, right? Essentially colluding with Hamas terrorists and essentially letting them hide weapons, things like that, in like clinics, right? And places like that. And they published a bunch of pictures, a bunch of profiles, right? And it turns out that they were using a lot of AI to pump out this kind of articles, blogs, social media posts, right? At the same time, they were buying a lot of ads from Google. So whenever people search for, the UNRWA, right? And, Gaza, Israeli-sponsored content will pop up on the first page, on the top of the first page, and so on and so forth. And this is not inconsequential because a lot of American politicians bought into this, and the United States government decided to start funding the UN Refugee Aid Agency. We did. And this is not just a small incident because that means children, women who could not receive any aid for months on end. In fact, they still cannot get any aid because of this, right? They are dying, they are starving. So just a little tricks with artificial intelligence can result in, right, offline consequences. I think, we are seeing a lot more of this these days. And don't take my word for it. The World Economic Forum has this annual report called Global Risk. They've been publishing this for 3 decades. It is perhaps the gold standard for a lot of risk analysts and even investors to think about what are the things they need to sort of mitigate if they're going to invest here and there. It's a very important report that a lot of large organizations pay a lot of attention to. Typically, they'll pick the most important risk factors on a yearly basis. Typically it'll be migration, unequal economic development, climate change, right? Violent extremism, the staple items, right? For the first time in 30 years, the World Economic Forum said that the most destabilizing, risk for the short run would be AI-generated and mis and disinformation, right? So I think these are some of the real risks, and this is not theoretical risk. These are the risks that have actually manifested in real life, right? So I think, perhaps one conversation I'm really, trying to engender here is that despite the risk, the real risk and the real consequences, I think not a lot of us, researchers, policymakers, or perhaps even private sector organizations are thinking about these issues, right? Very few countries, in fact, have any policy frameworks to even address AI-generated content, right? So I'll give an example. The reason those fake audio clips and video clips went on viral is those countries didn't have any policies on such content. The platforms, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, didn't have any content moderation policies, right? You have no intervention tools, so what do? You just let them go viral, right? And they go on viral, right? So I think, this is not something that technology alone can solve. So again, this is why I think we need this kind of policy discussion and conversations, because by the time, we stand up any guardrails, there's a good chance that it'll be too late. And perhaps, yes,
Maybe you're going to get to this,
yes.
but I'm sort of curious. Your focus here is mostly around. Sorry, you may get to it, but your focus here is mostly around social media impacts. Okay. How is AI influencing mainstream media? And the reason why I'm saying this is that over the past year, we have had, I would say, a number of incidents where information has basically been siphoned out of the mainstream media. Example, the US sabotage on the Nord Stream gas line. I mean, both in Europe, but also the United States, you have heard nothing of it. I mean, even one day after the incident, the story just went dead. Now, how is AI influencing mainstream media in terms of biasing information dissemination? You may not get to, it may not be part of your.
That's a really important question. So I think there are several angles to your remarks, right? On one hand, can we use artificial intelligence to perhaps, detect and surface, certain biases in news coverage, right? I'll get to it because there are some really powerful use cases using artificial intelligence to be able to do that at scale. So let me give you something very concrete to consider, right? Instead of just me staying theoretical. Look up ground news. It's a news curation, ground news. So like ground level news, right? So we have this term called ground truth, right? So ground truth news, ground news. And what they do is they use AI models to essentially assess and evaluate tens of thousands of newspaper articles, blogs, right? And then give them several probabilistic metrics. Is it leaning left? Is it leaning right? Right? Is it factual? Is it generally fictional? What is its source credibility over time, right? Because just because one piece is credible doesn't mean that the source is always credible, right? Just because one story is kind of misleading doesn't mean that the source is always, not credible, right? So there are a lot of endeavors where, news curation services are used. We used to do this in a smoke-filled, editorial room, right? But that doesn't scale, in terms of the vast volume of content we see day in and day out. Oh, by the way, I have a really important nugget for you to perhaps appreciate. If you put all the digital content we are creating on an annual basis, right? And let's just say you're trying to put all the data onto blank DVD disk, right? And then you stack each DVD disk over the other, right? And you keep stacking them, right? How tall do you think the stack of DVD disk will go? From our planet to Mars and then come back. That's how much data we are producing on an annual basis. And this is why, right now, building, right, data centers is all the rage, right? And this is why it's consuming so much energy, right? So that smoke-filled, editorial board or room that we used to have cannot match this overwhelming volume of content data that we are generating all the time, right? So now a lot of news curation services essentially using AI to be able to, hey, this is leaning left, wait, this is leaning right. Of course, it's not covering this incident because it's leaning left, and this specific news is kind of favoring the conservatives. So this news outlet is skipping this news, is intentionally not covering this news. And this is becoming incredibly accurate, right? So I use AI tools all the time. And it's going to sound a little bit heretic, but like large language models, when they're properly tuned and parameterized, I used to, and I still teach from time to time, right? These models are better than 95% of all graduate student research assistants I've had. And they're not lazy. They don't go home and then come back with a crappy one-page summary 2 weeks later, right? It happens like this, right? I never use the raw outputs, right? But in terms of doing some of the rudimentary, right, simple research, summarization, abstraction, finding the sources, right? This is where we should bring scale to information authentication, right? And I think this is where some of the use cases must be developed. Now, there's a huge caveat, to your question, and that is, again, a lot of large language models, we call them what? What's the most mob they come with? OpenAI has what? Chat GPT, right? So it's a GPT that is capable of chit-chatting with you. That's it. What is GPT? Generative pre-trained transformers, right? Transformer is the particular deep neural network architecture. Generative means that it can essentially predict what voice should come out of phrases, right? Pre-trained is the most important part of that molecule, GPT. It means it is pre-trained on vast volumes of digital content that a lot of people, human beings, have created, right? And a lot of the content is based on which language? English, right? So in terms of using AI to be able to detect, it has to be probabilistic. It can never be binomial, right? It can never be dichotomous or binary. It's always, probabilistic. And if you look at ground news, you will see that essentially it's a toggle bar, right? It's distributional, right? So it turns out that because they're trained on vast volumes of English-based content, they're really good at predicting content that are based in English, right? But when it comes to other languages, other cultures, other contexts, they don't perform as well. And this is why I told you about this global AI infrastructure, and there is this growing structural stratification taking place within this global AI infrastructure. And that's what I meant by inherent inequality, right? So localization is really key for properly employing and building AI, right? And I'll give you a very specific example. It's your fault that I'm dwelling on this point too long. So I'll give you a very specific examples. I was using like 3 different AI models: Llama, Cloud AI, and GPT 4.0. That's the most advanced version of GPT at this point. And I told them, hey, I want to be useful to my friends in Malaysia. I'm going to Malaysia. Give me like all possible research funding sources for Malaysian universities, right? Typically, it would have taken weeks, if not months, for me to do that, right? 2 seconds, boom, 50 sources, right? Really good. And I picked one funding source. I told these AI models, hey, look at this, I can a funding source, look at the requirements, understand the requirements, right? And then, it's spinning, right? Right? And I told it, write a 10-page long funding proposal, especially for that funding source. 2 seconds, I have a full proposal. It's not very good. I still have to put a lot of, expertise-based systems I've ever worked with, right? Now, I told you we should think about how to build really good use cases. My voice is loud enough.
There are 3 viewers online. 3 viewers online.
Huh?
There are 3 viewers online.
Yes. Where was I? It's your fault this time.
Yes, mine.
Yes. So you still have to, currently it's not, artificial intelligence is definitely artificial, but it's not intelligent yet, okay? So expectation management. So, but it's really good at summarizing. It's really good at translating. It's really good at data normalization, and it's really good at finding data for me. So, I have this full draft proposal within like 10 seconds, right? Now, I told you that AI can be also used really, for good use cases. Now, there's this incredibly useful tool called Zero GPT. Look it up, Zero GPT. So essentially, it's a tool that can detect AI-generated content, right? So what I did was I copy and pasted this full proposal, and then I gave it to Zero GPT, and I asked Zero GPT, hey, what's the probability that this proposal is AI-generated, right? Spot on, 100%. It was even able to identify which GPT I use to generate the proposal, right? So it's always back and forth, risk and opportunity, right? Now I'm going back to Cloud AI, right? Anthropic's, large language model. And I told Cloud AI, look, I'm going to Malaysia, right? I don't want to be a total jackass. Can you please translate this 10-page long funding proposal into Malaysian, right? 2 seconds. I have the full proposal translated into Malaysian. I didn't have to pay a dime to hire a translator. I didn't have to pay a dime to ask a friend to review this translation, right? Now, here's the kicker. So I copy and pasted the translated, right, AI-generated proposal onto Zero GPT, right? And I asked it, hey, what's the probability that this is AI-generated, right? Do you know what it said? No, 80%. 80% it was AI-generated. So I understand this is anecdotal, but I've done enough of these experiments to tell you with some confidence that they're not as good at detecting non-English AI-generated content, right? Which means in the tech industry, we have this expression, garbage in, garbage out. Because it's mostly pre-trained on English-based content, they perform really well with English content, but they don't perform too well in other languages. Now, just sprinkle some multi-linguistic context, multicultural context, multi-ethnic context, and very complex, like regional, confluence of religions, right? And this is where a lot of AI models essentially fall apart, right? Again, I think it's inherently unequal, right? Because American tech companies are using global content to train their models. They are printing money, like literally they're printing money, right? But what about the rest of the world's credit? What about their benefits, right? So again, I think these are some of the most important conversations to have about artificial intelligence in my mind, right? Yes, this information, that's very important. But to me, that is just one symptom of this structural inequality that we are seeing in the AI field at this point, right? At this point, I want to show you something really interesting. You can see the statistics. Just to sound a little bit ironic, this is what I call the democratization of AI-powered disinformation, right? So yeah, it's very democratic because anybody can do this at this point, right? So a little joke. there is this really, hype conversation about the potential of job displacement that AI will induce, right? There are some real economists who have written some really important research papers about this, right? I have a fairly, a peculiar stance on that issue because looking at the history of technology, when we first invented automobiles, a lot of doctors predicted that humans will atrophy their legs and essentially will have no lower body muscle density if we continue to use automobiles. I think those predictions were slightly flawed, right? Now, coming back to this notion about job displacement, I think the first professionals that will lose their jobs because of artificial intelligence will be online trolls or troll farms, because artificial intelligence can do disinformation, right, and online harassment much better than human trolls. So I don't know whether that's good news or bad news, but I think a lot of Russian propaganda trolls, I think, will be out of job very fast. I just want to show you some more examples. And again, I'm not being hypercritical. I think there's some incredibly powerful use cases with artificial intelligence. And I'm very fortunate, very lucky because I work in Silicon Valley. So constantly people are hyping their AI products and so on and so forth. So let me share a little bit of this, right? Because I also want to show you what AI can do to mitigate, or perhaps reverse some of these potential harms stemming from artificial intelligence. So this is from a Hollywood tech company called Flawless AI. Look it up. They have some publicly available content. I think it's worth watching.
Now we're stuck on this stupid tower in the middle of nowhere. And I don't blame you, and now we're stuck on this stupid freaking tower in the middle of freaking nowhere. And it's all my fault. Que necesito de ellos. Y es todo por mi culpa.
Did you notice what the actor was doing? So essentially, we can map her facial muscle movements, right? And then predict what kind of muscle movements her face would make when making individual tokenized sound bit, right? So when she's skipping words, her mouth stays closed. When she's speaking Japanese, right, her facial muscle movement match Japanese. When she's speaking Spanish, the same thing, right? So I know the CEO of this company quite well. And I asked him, wow, this is incredible, right? I think you can make a lot of money with this, but what are you going to do if your technology falls in the wrong hands? He just raised about $200 million, part of his Series B funding. So he's doing okay. And his response was, that's not my responsibility. It's a very common attitude among AI technologies, right? And the reason I'm sort of encouraging you to have localized conversations about artificial intelligence and AI governance is that I think we made this terrible mistake of asking social media platforms to do the right thing. I think the track record of that endeavor is fairly poor. But it's not always bad, because the second clip you're about to watch is a different use case.
This is Victoria Shi, Ukraine's new AI-generated virtual spokesperson.
I can handle a variety of routine tasks. As a result, real-world diplomats have more time to address more difficult issues.
I sent questions to Shi to the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry to let officials script responses. First up, why does Ukraine's Foreign Ministry have an AI spokesperson?
Diplomacy is a rather conservative field that is often slow to adopt cutting-edge innovations. Ukraine, however, has wartime diplomacy. If we want to win the war, we need to be one step ahead technologically. And we are, as you can see.
What can you do that people can't?
I could certainly function with
Oh, by the way, this is a real-time conversation between an AI-generated spokesperson and the reporter.
without sleep, which is quite useful during wartime. I am also fluent in over 30 of the most popular languages. Few speakers can do that, and I keep learning new languages. Last but not least, I always look great in the morning because I do not go out late at night.
She took suggestions based on Rosalie Nonde, a Ukrainian singer who comes from Donetsk, currently under Russian occupation. On Instagram, she said it was time to stop what she called the chauvinist past of ignoring other ethnic groups that live in Ukraine. She's focus is consular affairs, a controversial area right now, after Ukraine suspended consular services for military-aged men abroad.
The suspension of new applications for consular services to military-aged men abroad is a technical and temporary measure. Internal procedures must be adjusted to comply with the new mobilization law recently passed by the Ukrainian parliament. Once adjusted, we will continue to accept applications in accordance with the new law.
That new law reduces the mobilization age and is aimed at boosting recruitment for Ukraine's armed forces, which has been depleted by 2 years of war. One last question for Shi. Critics have suggested it'll be easy for people to make fake videos featuring you. What's your response?
My creators address the issue of potential fakes. A QR code can be found in the corner of this video. It links to the exact same statement on the ministry's official website.
So, yes.
What engine generated this video? What artificial intelligence engine generated this particular?
Can you guess?
Yeah,
Can you guess?
I don't know.
HeyGen. HeyGen, the same deepfake generator I showed with you earlier. By the way, that company just raised $60 million a month ago as part of their Series A funding. 11 Labs, the fake audio generator, they raised about $80 million as part of their Series B funding earlier this year. So they're doing okay. Oh, by the way, this is one of my favorite statistics. So since GPT became publicly available, we all know there is a lot of money going into the AI field. And also this is why AI will be just ubiquitous in the next few years. Can you guess how much money has gone into the AI field since ChatGPT became publicly available? Just give me your best guess. You're making it very, very boring. You're too good. It's a good round number, $1 trillion, right? And there's a thing about capitalism, and that is when you put in that much money, you don't give up until you get your 10x, 100x returns, right? So even if we have some really ethical concerns, right? I think artificial intelligence will become as ubiquitous, as omnipresent as the internet in the next couple of years, if not sooner than that, right? So to me, it's really about alignment, right? It's going to happen. It is happening. Then what can we do to align artificial intelligence where things are more important than just fake news, disinformation, and etc. And I think, again, I'm not trying to show you like pies in the sky, right? I'm just trying to encourage you to have certain conversations, right? Because I'm kind of repeating myself, but I've been working very closely with several social media platforms. I've been, talking to a lot of people on the Hill about these matters. And we literally dropped the ball on social media, right? By the time we tried to do something about them, it was too late. That industry had become too big, right? So with artificial intelligence, we have a chance to have these conversations earlier than what we did with social media. And it's really about two things, alignment and governance, right? And these are not straightforward conversations because a lot of times a knee-jerk reaction is regulation, regulation, regulations, right? But there is a really dicey sort of slippery slope there, because I think the fear of AI-generated disinformation should not lead to any suppression of free speech in my mind, right? Because free speech, whether we like it or not, is also an integral part of democracy, right? So, and this is not theoretical. I think, if you look at what's happening at the EU level, if you take a look at what's happening in the United States, and if you take a look at what's happening perhaps in places like, Turkey, Egypt. I'm too close to China geographically, so I'm not going to say that, but you said it, so thank you. So he said China. I don't know, but he said China, okay? So essentially, there are two regimes of AI governance emerging globally at this point, right? On one hand, we're trying to align artificial intelligence with certain normative values, right? Some principles, right? Respect for diversity, some sort of, equity when it comes to economic development and things like that. The other regime of AI governance is like, oh my God, what a great gift from God. Now we can surveil everyone nonstop, right? We don't even have to have human agents to do surveillance anymore, right? We can know everything there is about everyone in my sort of, sovereignty. So these two sort of, regimes of AI governance are both emerging and both competing, but also it has a lot to do with, I don't want to get too theoretical, but also has a lot to do with other aspects of communications technology, because what I fear the most is perhaps an autocratic regime of AI governance combined with 5G and 6G and then IoT, right? I think those prospects are pretty terrifying in my mind, right? And it begins with really, how we align and how we think about AI governance. So like, stepping away from those, big theoretical and philosophical conversations, I want to actually show you something that is perhaps a little bit more aligned. Nope. So this is Hani Farid. He's a professor of computer science and electrical engineering at this really not very well-known crappy college called the University of California, Berkeley. He's local to me. He's a good friend of mine. We collaborate from time to time. And so he is, at least in the United States, he is the expert on deepfake detection and analysis, right? And he's like literally a computer scientist who's been studying this and researching this his entire life. So his mission is essentially, hey, yes, AI can proliferate this photorealistic, fake content. Can we use AI to detect, deepfakes at scale? So essentially, this is one of the most unique use cases of artificial intelligence in my mind. And he's trying to make sure that these AI-driven solutions can become widely available, right? So like newsrooms, reporters, and journalists can quickly authenticate whether a source or whether a source story is real or not. I've been working with a lot of reporters and journalists. A lot of times they spend so much time just trying to decide whether a lead is biased, whether it is real, whether somebody is trying to trick them into saying something, to serve their own agenda and so on and so forth. So this is a really incredible application of artificial intelligence. So let's just take a quick look.
Thanks for the opportunity to demonstrate some of what we've been doing in real life over the last few years. I'm a professor at Berkeley, also co-founder and chief science officer at Real Labs. And I'm going to just demo to you some of the features, the subset of the way we are thinking about authenticating digital media. So what you're seeing on my left is our interface, the web-based interface, everything of course cloud-based. I just do the nice about these models that they find things that are not particularly obvious. The drawback is they're not particularly explainable. So one of the things we also work on is trying to really have explainability tools. Some of those are automatic, some of them are manual. I'm going to show you some of the manual ones and some of the automatic ones as well. So this is some of my favorite ones. So this is just a little supplemental that I saw it opened up, and I'm going to open up the perspective analysis. And one of the things is that we are trainers.
And this sort of organization is called Get Real Labs, and I think twofold. One hand, I'll do my best to make this kind of tools for you to perhaps try out, right? But number two, I think I told you that a lot of AI tools, they work best when they're properly contextualized and localized, right? So there will be no universal AI tools. And AI tools, AI companies, they always say that their tools are universal. That's just hype, right? So I think really encouraging and thinking about how to make AI work for you in your own context, right? I think that's really key. Not only AI governance, but also AI implementation.
They all have to converge to a single vanishing point. This has been known since the time of Renaissance painters. So what I'm going to do here is allow the user to select a few lines. You can see that these two lines, of course, converge to a single point. But as I start to add more lines, you can see that already we've run into some trouble. So this line, and this line, and this line, you have a real estate parallel surfaces, parallel lines, should all converge to a single vanishing point. So we can find physical inconsistencies that are unlikely to occur in a image without some other explanation. So that's one of the more explainable tools. The other tool that I really like is shadow analysis. This is a really nice image to illustrate this. It's taken outdoors, there are strong cast shadows, and you can reasonably assume that there is one light source in the scene. And so I'm going to go ahead and constrain where those are. So what I'm going to do here is pick constraints where I've got pointers.
The reason being, there's only one source of lighting, the sun. So unless there are two suns, right, all shadows should have some kind of common vector, right?
Shadow, corresponding point on the object. And now I know that the light must live somewhere in that cone right there. I'm going to pick another shadow over here and constrain it on the guy's head here. And you can see when I zoom out that there is a common intersection for those two constraints. So those two shadows are in fact physically plausible. And now I'm going to just start going through the image and finding more constraints. Here's another one, same thing, physically plausible. Okay, now let's go take this guy over here. The big constraint, and the reason I'm picking the big constraints here is I don't know exactly where that shadow is. And now you can see all the constraints went from green to red. That's this. And that means there's no common intersection for all of these constraints. So something's gone wrong. So that's the way that you can manually analyze it. That's great if you're doing it one-offs, not so much if you're doing a large scale analysis. So let me go ahead and skip to the next image. That's this one right here. So this is an image that I generated in OpenAI Dolly. Same thing, something seems to be wrong. The pixel pattern that I described to you earlier says that the image is synthetic, that's that model. And in this case, we got a little lucky because in this case, we have a C2PA content credential. And this content credential, we scroll.
Watermarking protocols.
Explainable. You can see that it is a ChatGPT image. It has been signed by the creator. And now we have very strong evidence that something is AI generated in addition to the models that I showed you here. Of course, not all images are fake. This is an image that was
So at least in the United States and in some parts of Europe, instead of trying to slow down AI technology, people are trying to build and adopt watermarking protocols, right? So for the sake of content transparency, so look, go use AI models for your creativity, do whatever you want, right? But essentially there'll be embedded metadata in that file suggesting that it was created by certain AI model, right? The limitations are essentially it's an opt-in protocol. So if somebody is not opting in, it's not very useful. And the other sort of limitation is that anything that can be embedded can be stripped out as well. but it's better than nothing, because I think that these protocols also provide some really important potential, and that is, instead of constraining the development of artificial intelligence because we are so concerned about its safety, right? By building and sharing some of these protocols, you don't have to constrain or slow down the technology, right? In fact, you can accelerate the adoption of this kind of technology. So I think, but these protocols, right? Also, they need to be contextualized, they need to be localized. So again, these are some of the very specific, I mean, these are to me all policy conversations, right? And the sooner each country start this conversation, they'll be better positioned to benefit from artificial intelligence as opposed to being pushed down to the lower end of the global AI supply chain, right?
We got the President Donald Trump was doing the discussion with Elon Musk on X, and there's a lot of controversy about some of the photos that were coming out, and this photo was sent from each one that's data. And here you can see that there's no evidence of manipulation. So we ran through the model, there's no signatures, there's no patterns that would suggest AI. Does that mean that it's real? No, not necessarily. Microevidence is not evidence. One of the nice tools we have here that I just really like to use, it's not always obvious how when it comes to play, is what's called viewpoint correction. You can see that I've already done this here just so you can see it. So on this one, what I've done is I've taken the screen here, which you really just can't see what's going on, and I've asked the computer to show me what it would look like if I was looking directly above it, and that's what you see here. It's exactly the same. You can see, in fact, you can almost see Trump's face, you can almost see Elon Musk's face here, and you can see that this is
That's great.
a consistent type of image you would expect on a screen when you are at the opposed to some garbled mess that you get from AI-generated content. That's just a subset of features. We've got audio analysis in here, we've got video analysis in here, we've got fully automatic models, some things that are semi-automatic and some things that are manual on that own. I hope that this gives you a sense of some of the types of things that we can do. Thanks again for your time.
So essentially, he's using neural network models to be able to detect and analyze synthetic content at scale and speed, right? And his intent is to perhaps even build a browser extension plugin, right? You just hover your cursor on top of an image, right? Or a video, right? And then get probabilistic forensic results in real time. That way, we don't waste time trying to dissect a piece of content for hours, days, or weeks, because when we do that, essentially we are favoring the bad guys and girls that are continuously pushing synthetic content. So to me, it may seem a little bit tactical, but building this kind of AI use cases and models, it's really important for us to be able to harness the power of artificial intelligence, right? And I think especially for a lot of countries outside the US, I mean, I may sound a little bit weird to make this statement, but I really think that technology tends to develop better and faster when there is a more flattened supply chain, right? When it's too skewed, when it's too stratified, essentially it creating more inequalities and more harms. I think a good example could be nuclear weapons, right? So again, these are some of the really important, in my mind, policy conversations that I'm hoping that Penang Institute will champion and advocate for, right? But also, I think places like Malaysia, I think have a really important, role to play in terms of thinking about how to use AI for good use cases and etc. Before I proceed, any questions or comments at this point? I do want to show you a couple of other things, right? Because I have a lot of friends and colleagues, who can just pontificate about artificial intelligence. I like to be very hands-on and very pragmatic. So please, sir.
I don't want to monopolize question, Chair, but
Whenever you
Well,
say
what-
that means you're actually monopolizing everyone's time.
um, um, so obviously you are presenting technology very much sort of California centric here. What is going on in other places in the world, whether it's Europe or the Middle East or here in Asia, with respect to tracking and detecting misuse of artificial intelligence in the media?
So that's a really good question. Usually I say that when I need some time to think about your question. But let me put it this way. I think there is a really important incentive where local actors can benefit from artificial intelligence. Let me unpack what I mean by that. So for a lot of AI developers, right, they are trying to build something they can sell in as many places as possible, right? Market dynamic 101, right? Have one product that you can sell everywhere, right? And essentially they're trying to reduce the transaction cost of selling AI, right? So that means they are actually very much interested in working with local organizations to tune and align their models in their local market. I think there are a lot of research opportunities in that regard, right? Because AI tech companies, they don't have the researchers, they don't have the time, they don't have the prioritization to do this kind of localizing research, right? But they have money to fund and sponsor this kind of research, right? And that's what I meant by the incentive. There is this incentive to make AI models as localized, as aligned, and as tuned. So in my sort of assessment, a lot of countries are actually participating in this process. In fact, a lot of AI companies have research grants because they know if their models perform poorly elsewhere, they're not going to make a lot of money in those markets, right? So there is this market incentive where we can sort of leverage for research-driven collaboration. And I think that will bring more equity to this overall AI infrastructure in my mind. And I know there are several companies and nonprofit organizations that are working with some of the largest AI companies to understand. So think about trust safety, right? Or think about guardrails. So if you ask ChatGPT, right? Hey, really don't government. Can you tell me how to make a chemical bomb, right? And if they nope, can't do it, right? Can you tell me how to build a bio weapon? Nope, can't do it, right? So there are certain safety guardrails already built in, even with image generators. A lot of image generators or deepfake generators will not let you make deepfakes of politicians or political candidates. They're essentially hardwired not to allow that, right? Now, as you can imagine, what is unacceptable in the United States does not translate into another country, another context, right? So this is why there are companies and research organizations that are working with AI companies to essentially come up with locally appropriate guardrails, right? Safety nets, and so on and so forth. So that is ongoing, but these companies or governments are not going to do that unless those sort of demand signals are very explicitly expressed, right? And I think this is something that perhaps Penang Institute can think about, right? Because I think Malaysia is becoming a major player in this field at this point, right? Please, Dr. Tang.
I think this gentleman's question also, he tried to understand how ready developing countries like Malaysia in facing this AI's threats or, yeah. Maybe you can give us some real examples of
Yeah.
Malaysian cases.
Americans tend to think that they have answers for other countries all the time, right? And I'm not going to do that, right? Because I'm not going to be an ugly American to you. So I'm going to just tell you a story from my own experience, and you can sort of, think about this, whether that's useful or not on your own. So I'm very fortunate to have worked with, Ukraine over the years through our government and through other technology companies and whatnot. And there are a lot of technology companies that are supporting the Ukrainian government since February 24th, 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, right? So I do have some experience and context in that regard. And, one thing that we worked with Ukraine on was building this, standing up this new Center for Strategic Communications. So essentially, it's a coordination hub, government programs, media organizations, NGOs, technology companies, fact checkers, right? All sharing resources, research, collaboration, right? To be able to detect, counter and, announce Russian disinformation and propaganda about the war, right? And this is not the first time Russia invaded Ukraine, right? So it started in 2014 when they annexed Crimea and essentially occupied some eastern parts of Ukraine. And, I remember 2014 quite well. I mean, Ukraine just couldn't do, it was completely paralyzed, right? It was overwhelmed. This time around, Ukraine is doing much better in the information environment, right? We see their content a lot more than Russian content about the war, right? Have you noticed that most people actually, they can access accurate, content about the war in Ukraine, mostly pushed by Ukraine organizations and actors, right? People have a more accurate picture of what's happening on the ground. I think that has a lot to do what they learned since 2014. Oh, by the way, I really hate that this is being streamed or recorded because it kind of restricts my free speech. Back in the day, Ukraine really didn't have a good relationship between the government, civil society, and the media, right? Because there was just a lot of corruption. So a lot of civil society organizations were constantly criticizing the government. And of course, the government never wanted to work with civil society organizations or media organizations for that matter, right? But with this invasion, essentially, they came together. They, essentially built a lot of coordination mechanisms, and that culminated into this Center for Strategic Communication that was responsible for, securing their own media ecosystem. And Russia has been really active pushing disinformation into the Ukrainian media ecosystem. But I would argue that the reason they're doing much better this time is that they understood the importance of building this, coordination mechanisms, right? Whether it's wartime or not, I think that is probably the most important lessons learned from the Ukrainian experience. And, whenever we have really consequential disinformation campaigns, the reason that we don't respond too well is not because we are dumb. It's not because we do not understand the threats. It's a lot of times we don't know who's in charge, right? So a lot of different government departments will be looking over their shoulder, right? Is it your lane? Is it my lane? Am I doing detection? Are you doing responses? Who's writing the reports? Which phone number should I call to essentially get authorized to do anything about the data, right? If I need to buy any software, who's responsible for it? Which line of item? Which budget? By the time there's a crisis, most people stay paralyzed because they're trying to figure out who's responsible for what, whom to talk to. They don't even know who's on the other side of that phone line. We don't use phones anymore. On the other side of that email, right? So this is why it's so important to build those coordination mechanisms earlier on, right? So, and we've been doing a lot of this in Europe as well. So NATO has this NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence in Riga, Latvia. And essentially this is the hub. It's not the authority, this is not the center, but this is essentially a coordination hub for all NATO member states when it comes to disinformation, right? AI generated, fake content, and how to secure each member state's media ecosystem. Because look, war is almost constant in the information environment, right? So there is that. So another example that I'm very familiar with is the Hybrid Center of Excellence in Finland, in Helsinki, Finland. And what they do is actually quite innovative because I'm involved. I'm being a little bit selfish and ridiculous, right? But what they do is they organize these crisis war games among member states, right? In peacetime. So they simulate certain cyber attacks, right? They simulate certain information operation campaigns targeting their elections, perhaps, right? Like, perhaps there is this disinformation campaign trying to undermine public trust in the political process. It's a very common attack vector, right? So what they do is they organize this multi-stakeholder, multi-agency war games. So people can experience that kind of crisis in peacetime. And the most important part of those like exercises or war games is that people, I need to talk to Dr. Tang, right? If I want to get, Penang Institute involved, I need to talk to this lady because she is the real power, right? So just understanding and illuminating the key stakeholders and knowing how to pull resources when there's a real crisis of, cyber attack or disinformation attack, right? To me, because once you start building those, coordination mechanisms, if those relationships mature, what do they become? They become their own institution, their own organization, right? I think that's really the end state to me. And that has to take place before there's a crisis. If you're trying to build anything when there's a crisis, it's way too late, right? So that would be sort of, my 2 cents, right? I'm not suggesting this is appropriate for Malaysia. I'm just sharing some of my, professional experiences. But I'll tell you this much. So perhaps I need to change the background before I tell you this story. Okay, this is a good one. So I've been working with a lot of analysts over the years, especially when I was with the government. And I had an army of analysts. All they do is, reading a bunch of social media posts, reading a bunch of newspapers, right? In a lot of languages, translating them, summarizing them, and writing reports about who's saying what. By the time we have any report, it's about 2 weeks old, and then, our adversaries are talking about something else, right? We're always behind the power curve, right? So I got so fed up with this, what we call strategic latency, or lag, right? I decided to use essentially artificial intelligence to do this kind of data ingestion, data analysis automatically. So this is essentially the results of some of this, technology. So what I'm doing is, hey, give me all sources, newspapers, right? Blogs, social media accounts, right? Q&A sites, I don't care what it is. If it's talking about Malaysia and the South China Sea, find all of them, right? And essentially the scrapers go out there and find all the matching sources. I don't care that it's social media, newspaper, TV broadcast, I don't care, right? Because, we're trying to be very source agnostic because we don't know where attacks may come from. It could come from TV. It could come from podcasts. It could come from social media, right? And then I'm looking at, essentially using a lot of NLP models, natural language model, processing models. I'm looking at what they're talking about, right? Are they talking about the Malaysian government? Are they talking about the 9 dotted line, right? Are they talking about the Chinese Navy? Are they talking about perhaps certain Malaysian, companies, extracting natural gas in the South China Sea and whatnot, right? And I can also take a look at all the timestamp. Every piece of publication, content, right, will have a timestamp when it was published, when it was released, right? And now I can also see whether one piece of content is similar to another piece of content, right? And I can do that in multiple languages. So even if the source article was in Russian, right, and somebody says something similar in English, I can still establish a probabilistic level of similarity, right? So if you have all this data, now we can establish what we call vector, right? Point 1, point 2, direction, and both data points have timestamps, right? Now I can establish content diffusion and content propagation, right? That means I can tell where narratives come from, where they go, who amplified those narratives, right? And whether those narratives are factual or not, right? So that's what we're seeing on the screen. And this is literally the tool I use every day, right? I mean, this is our tool, so I am biased, right? Now, the reason I'm giving you this demonstration is that I think because AI can help bad actors produce so much content, unless we automate some aspects of detection, right? The idea here is that we need to prioritize the most threatening information attacks as opposed to trying to look at everything and stay completely what we call analysis paralysis, right? And analysis paralysis is perhaps some of the most important effects that bad actors are trying to impose on us. Because by just giving so much bad content, we get completely lost in the sea of bad content and we cannot properly respond, right? So again, another example where we are using artificial intelligence to be able to push back bad actors exploiting and weaponizing artificial intelligence for information warfare. Now, I picked this topic intentionally because I told you that you have to build this kind of coordination mechanisms, but also you have to tune and align certain AI technologies to meet your needs locally, right? And because I think Malaysia is becoming an important player, has become an important player in artificial intelligence, but also a very important player in the South China Sea, right? Now you are getting some attention. You are getting some attention from malign actors, right? I'm not going to say which country. But I've seen a lot of malign information operations attacking Malaysian sovereignty, Malaysian claims in the South China Sea, especially in the context of the Philippines as well, Vietnam, right? And guess what? It's that country plus Russian sources amplifying that country's narratives about Malaysia and the South China Sea. And the frequency and volume of that information operations is really on the rise, right? And I think it's going to get much, much worse. So going back to your question, right? I think you have to start right now, if not yesterday, right? So that would be my very labored and prolonged answer to your very succinct question. But that's what academics do, right? We never give you a short, succinct answer. Any other questions, comments? Yes, please. Yeah.
It's a corollary question.
Oh, by the way, if you guys want to see a full demo of this technology, you can just reach out to me. We actually work very closely with several governments so they can essentially track who's saying misleading narratives about certain policy priorities and whatnot.
It sort of relates to this because from your vantage point, obviously US backed, etc. When you look at your quote unquote competitors, Russia, China, how is your assessment of their ability to do some of the things that you are doing?
Where are you from?
I'm from Denmark.
Denmark. Oh, very nice. Very nice. Well, that doesn't mean they're your friend. That's a really good question. Again, it's complicated. So, artificial intelligence is a collection of a lot of different fields, right? So there are large language models, there are computer vision models, there are GAN models, right? So when it comes to large language models, or what we call foundation models, the kind of models that are very data intensive and very compute power intensive. So I am very fortunate to work with special competitive projects, studies project in the United States. So essentially this is the leading AI think tank in the United States. And SSP advises the White House on all things related to AI policy, right? And based on the assessment, I think the United States, or let's just say the West, is about 5 years ahead of China. Russia is not even a player in this regard, right? It's really China and the United States. And I think, the UK is trying to play in this space as well, right? And this is why, the United States has been working with a lot of its allies and partner nations to restrict the transfer of certain core technologies in this global AI supply chain, right? So this is why we actually work very closely with the Dutch, because they have certain core technologies that are very important for semiconductor manufacturing and designing, right? And this is why we work very closely with Japan. This is why we work very closely with South Korea, Taiwan, but also with Malaysia, right? Because garbage in, garbage out. It turns out that data centers are really important, right? And Malaysia has been hosting a lot of data centers. You guys know this much better than me. I think Microsoft invested $2.2 billion, right? By the way, this is not just the United States. I think ByteDance also invested about $2.2 billion. I don't know why they match the numbers, right? So Microsoft comes with 2.2 and then ByteDance goes, you know what? We're going to use 2.2 too, right? I don't know why. It's so petty. Google just also announced that, they're going to invest not 2.2, but just $2 billion in Malaysia. I mean, it just makes no sense to me, right? They have just really weird accountants in my mind. Economist? Of course. So coming back to your question, about 5 years, and all the so we have this new law, the CHIPS Act, right? And we're trying to make sure that the West stay about 5 to 10 years ahead, right? That way, the most advanced versions of AI cannot be fully weaponized. So that means the West will have some kind of deterrent posture in terms of adversarial AI weaponization, right? So I think that's, the stance, right? Whether it's enforceable or feasible, I think the jury is still out there. I'm just being honest with you, right? But also there is a more technical answer to your question, and that is, it turns out that, let me just try to unpack this. It turns out that AI models perform much better when they are trained on a lot of diverse data. So if you have a lot of variance in the training data, right, it's much better at prediction. I I almost feel like I have no evidence, right? But my technical hunch is that probably that's why Western large language models are doing so much better than Chinese large language models, because in the country they have this little inconvenient thing called censorship, right? So their content data, right, is artificially skewed. It's not very diverse, right? So there are certain parts of this training data that are completely missing, right? And they're training their large language models on this artificially truncated, right, and curtailed data. So I have no evidence because I don't have access to Chinese large language models, so I cannot test them. But my technical hunch is that it's essentially a blessing in disguise, right? And I think this is why open society tend to build better AI and better technologies, because they have access to incredibly diverse training data, right? So there is this. So I think there is some inherent technical and structural advantage to open societies to be able to build and advance better AI in my mind. Fingers crossed, because this is just projection as is, right? So in that regard, I think we have a real chance to essentially have not only more advanced AI, but also a better governance structure over AI, right? I think this is a real important chance, but also this chance have a very short shelf life, so to speak. Any other questions?
Yeah, we shall open the floor to everyone. If you have any question, please raise your hand and tell us who you are. You may ask question. Yeah.
Hi, good morning. My name is Thomas. I have a question. I'm still trying to formulate it, but I think the question is geared to how are you, or
I'm doing well.
how do we? Good to know. How are we attacking the idea that the large language models are based mostly in English? All the data is in English.
Yep.
And while we
Not
address
all.
our adversaries,
Yeah.
well, most of it.
Yeah.
While we're addressing our adversaries,
Mhm.
mainly our biggest competitor on the east side of the world, data there is maybe not as available. How do we address these markets, local markets, getting the data, but everything's in English. So in a sense, you are right. All our data is skewed and biased English language, large language models. How do we get even more diverse?
Yeah, I think that's a really important consideration, and this is why so there are two interesting twists to your observation. I think that might have something to do with the observation that certain countries have been stealing lots of content data from other countries, knowing that their own domestic data is kind of truncated and skewed. So they need other countries' free data to be able to train their large language models. It's just a hunch in the regard, right? And I think this is why AI is never universal, garbage in, garbage out. It really depends on the training data, right? And I think this is why there are tremendous opportunities. You don't have to use American AI models, right? I think there are tremendous opportunities, and it's becoming really cost effective to build small models, right? So there are large models, we call them foundation models, right? But not AI models have to be foundation models. You can build small localized models that are really tuned with local culture, local languages, and so on and so forth. And I think there's a huge market for it, right? In fact, I don't know whether it's relevant or not, but we have this term called no-code programming. So that means you don't need to know any specific programming language to be able to code apps, right? And with large language models, that's even more so the case. So, and I think this is where the dominance of English is also kind of can be convenient, right? I'm not like, advocating that, English is the best language. It's a horrible language. I speak 4 languages and English is my least favorite. It just makes no sense. If you look at its grammar, it makes no sense. It's a terrible language, right? But if you look at programming languages, if you look at the symbols, what are they? It's the English alphabet, right? All the key operators, right? All the key sort of, functional characters and words. It's all in English, right? By the way, large language models, when they're scraping all this data to be trained, it's not just content data, it's also code data, right? So I'm pretty sure you know this. If you talk to ChatGPT, right? And I actually have an example. I didn't get a chance to get around it, but let's just say I'm really concerned about election integrity, right? And I want to build an app where people can easily, access the hours, the locations where they can go cast their vote, right? I can ask ChatGPT, hey, I want you to code an app where people can just access to know where they need to go to cast their vote, right? 2 seconds, boom, I have the full code, right? So that's the back-end code, right? So I asked ChatGPT, I need a front-end design. Can you give me an HTML, code, right? For this front-end design. 2 seconds, boom, I have the full code, right? So I think these are some of the opportunities that not a lot of people are taking advantage of, right? So you don't have to go to a technical college. You don't have to go to a coding boot camp to be able to build apps, right? And if they don't work, just ask ChatGPT again, right? So it's always risk and opportunity, but how you essentially strike the balance between the two, it's not something anybody can tell you. It is like inherently local, inherently contextual in my mind, right? I'm sorry that I'm not giving you a good answer, but because there is no good answer, you have to build it, right? Yes. It's okay, I'll come to you. Yeah.
I think there is a very interesting example nearby Malaysia is in Singapore. They are working in 2 things. The first one is a kind of localized large language model.
Yep.
Its name is Sea Lion, Southeast Asian Language in One Network.
I'm going to study that.
Yeah, this is
Very good.
This is a very important project by AI Singapore, and it's open source. The goal is to fill the cultural and language gap and focusing on Southeast Asian languages, the local languages and cultures.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think the first version was released in December 2023, and now it's already released as open source. The other one thing is what I think the government in Singapore is proposing a kind of AI governance model.
Yep.
This is also
Yeah,
one
Singapore
important.
governance, I don't know, a little bit dicey. Yeah.
No, I think this is a proposal for international community for small states. There are a lot of things that interesting. I mean. To learn from.
Yes.
It's not specifically about the government itself. It's about how you can make AI governance for the generative AI age. Another thing, this is general, not about Singapore, is that there are now certain tools and systems that you can use as a company or as a university or as a government to build your own model on your own data. So you don't need to give your data to OpenAI to get a model. You can use the tool on your cloud, on your cluster, on your private, let's say, network of computers to make your
it's
own
called endpoint
model.
to endpoint encryption.
Yeah, and then in this way, you don't need to give your data to another party. So, and this can help to protect the national or the private assets. So,
thank you. I think I mean, you guys should pay him. His answer was much better than mine. But I think you touched on something really incredibly important, And I've been sort of, repeating this phrase AI governance without really unpacking what I mean by that, right? And to me, it's really threefold in my mind. Data privacy, right? Because there can be a lot of incidental data collection, and something that is private can be construed as public by using a large language model, right? Because large language models are really good at what we call imputation, guessing, right? So data privacy is really a cornerstone of AI governance, but not only as the output, but from the entire supply chain, right? So training data, come from somewhere, right? Do we have any privacy protections when essentially AI companies are scraping data to train their models, right? I think the second element of AI governance is copyright, right? Because this proliferation of artificial intelligence cannot lead to the decimation of journalism, right? Or media, right? So how do we essentially reconcile the development of large language models with copyright, right? And if you extend copyright a little bit, I think this is a really important part of that equity in AI governance, intellectual property. So it goes both for the model and data, right? So is this model using any IP protected data to be trained? Then what is the equitable credit system or incentive structure to sustain that relationship? Nobody's talking about this, right? I mean, we are talking about this back home and in some parts of Europe, but these are some of the really most important conversations that must take place in each context, in each locality in my mind, right? And also, there's a really, I don't know how to answer this question, but there's also really interesting but dicey aspect to IP, and that is, if I'm creating something using DALL-E, right? Or Midjourney, right? Or Kling AI. And I clean it up a little bit. I'm using a series of really sophisticated prompts to create a beautiful image, right? And the prompts are essentially my own creativity, right? But the outcome, that image, who owns the IP for that image, right? We have no protocol, we have no framework to even think about how to distribute IP on that output. So it's not on the data side, but also on the model side, right? So if I'm using hundreds of prompts, right? I spend hours refining my prompts, right? To create something really beautiful. As is, right? The creator gets no IP, right? So I think these are some of the most important conversations that has to take place in a highly localized context. So thank you so much for sharing those really important observations from Singapore. Are you from Singapore, by the way? Okay. But really important observation. Thank you so much.
I have a question.
Yes.
Right. So earlier, following that conversation about AI governance, with technology, if it is in the wrong hands, then it's bad. Guns and AI and plastic, all those are technology. Yes, right. Right. So it depends on the hands. So the governance, are you looking, regulation. So which part of control would be relevant, or would it be on the user side kind of control, or would it be the developer side that they have to actually pre-filter certain things that it cannot be done, or is it has to be both sides hand in hand? That's just first part of my question.
Yeah.
Then the second part is, maybe I want to take a step back. This is a little bit maybe too advanced. How many people are not aware of the powerful destruction of deep fakes or even fake news to begin with? Would awareness and training in even, I think up until today, we're still talking about media information literacy in this region. So how do we actually transition from this community that is still being trained on MIL, media information literacy, to this governance that they may not even understand?
Yeah, I think those are really like, multi-layered remarks slash, questions. I would offer two very simplistic observations. Number one, key is to me really auditability. And that is, think about like, automobiles, right? Or safety regulations, right? We don't have to like regulate them, right? But there has to be certain like standards, right? And that there has to be a body, an independent body that is capable of auditing AI models, right? And I think that has to be essentially across government, industry, and academia in my mind. I think that's the conversation taking place in the United States. The reason this auditability is so important is that if you wholesale try to regulate AI, right, then it's really difficult to like encourage innovation, but also it's really difficult to protect their IP, right? So making everything open source is also a fool's errand because nobody's going to invest in artificial intelligence that way, right? But auditability protects the IP, protects the innovation, and of course, there has to be some really rigorous, safety protocols in terms of how audits are essentially invoked, but also like, enforced, right? So that would be sort of, my 2 cents, right? Because I do think that, anything that is, slowing down this innovation, I mean, this is also like, really, I mean, I'm deeply conflicted, right? Because I think we need to build an entire superstructure to be able to harness the power of artificial intelligence. But that's going to slow things down, right? That means the country that this gentleman has in mind can advance much faster. And the consequences of that acceleration, adversarial acceleration, are actually pretty terrifying, right? Think about the social credit system, right? And then essentially imbued with artificial intelligence and 6G. I think that's pretty like draconian in my mind. So I think there's a really delicate trade-off to make, right? In terms of like media literacy, I think Finland is a really good example. I think Norway is also a really good example. Grade 1, they start learning about the internet. They start learning about social media and so on and so forth, right? So I think those. I think we're seeing some of those initiatives elsewhere as well. And that is like, I don't think I matter. I think my kids, younger people, I think, all the intervention is everything, right? So I think there has to be some kind of curriculum development, right? About how to introduce artificial intelligence, both the risk and opportunities of artificial intelligence as early as possible. So I think those are also some of the key conversations that are taking place back home and in other countries as well. So really important observations.
I have a question.
Yes.
Actually, good morning. Actually, my name is Johnny. I'm from Link Compass. We appreciate all the AI stuff, the risk governance. Currently, we also have the ISO standards for that.
Yep.
ISO 42001. So how much this has been accepted in the market and are the industries going for this? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think the industry is trying to resist any standardization naturally. I don't think there is any, so at least in the AI field, we have this industry consortium called the Foundation Model, like Foundation. So you can look them up, and they're trying to come up with internally developed standards and protocols, right? So there is that initiative, but also we have this organization called NIST, I think is National Innovation and Science, anyway, sorry, I can't remember what it stands for. Essentially, it's a department in the US government that is tasked with to come up with ISO-esque standards for AI models and AI development, right? So I think you're spot on. This initiative are taking place, so that technical specification that are being introduced as well. So it's just like whenever you plug any power outlet in, right, there's a little sign and then there's a little serial number. That means it actually meets certain ISO standardization, right? I think those initiatives are also taking place, but it's very nascent, right? And I think, frankly, I don't know how far that will go, because unlike other technologies, I think artificial intelligence is moving so fast, right? And I don't think anybody leading this kind of standardization effort at this point. So my quick answer to your question is that yes, NIST is really leading this in the United States, and the foundation is also leading this effort in the United States. So those are some examples to consider. But how far those standards will percolate around the globe, I have no clue at this point. Sorry about that.
Thank you. I think we have to close the session. As we conclude, AI actually hold both promise and perils when it comes to managing the complexity of modern information warfare. And I think we have to continue this conversation, fostering collaboration and critical thinking to harness AI full potential in safeguarding the integrity of our global information ecosystem. In Malaysia, we need to build up our capacity and ability to do so. Thank you, everyone, for attending, even at this raining day. Thanks.